My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life. I was muted! Welcome to the Doug Milk Pride YouTube channel. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and this live stream is part of a series I am calling Reading Reviews with Rebecca, which will analyze the critical reception of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice through the negative reviews written by top critics from Rotten Tomatoes, one review at a time. Now, this is not meant to belittle anyone's opinions, but rather serve as a study of art criticism and how we discuss film. I'm hoping that this endeavor will encourage all of us to be better consumers of cinema. This week, I'll be reading through a review from The Hollywood Reporter titled Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, film review. Very creative title, written by Todd McCarthy. You can click on the link in the video description below this live stream if you would like to follow along and read it for yourself, and I encourage you to do so. If Todd should ever see this video, I just want to say that I'm aiming to do this as civilly and analytically as possible, and I would ask that anyone watching live or posting in the comments would do the same. I'm simply taking a look at the criticism for and of BVS now from an historical point of view, given that these reviews were used by Warner Brothers in their decision-making process regarding the DC Extended Universe. Due to the poor reviews for Batman v Superman, the tone and approach to the franchise were changed for Justice League in 2017 and ultimately led to the destruction of the Snyderverse and Zack Snyder's planned 5-film arc for Superman that we did not get to see fully realized. So that is what I am doing here. And before I get into my background, I see that Dennis is in the live chat. Hey, Dennis, how you doing? Thanks for joining me. Feel free to share your comments in the live chat. Feel free to share your thoughts. If there's anything that we read in the Hollywood Reporter from Todd McCarthy, feel free to address them and respond to those things. And let's just share our thoughts about art criticism. It's always a lot of fun to hear how everybody reads these. You know, my interpretation of the review might be a little different. And sometimes the live chat helps me with questions I have when reading the reviews. So it's a team effort with these. So thank you for joining me. Well, before I get into Todd's thoughts, I'm sure that there are people who might watch this who say, you know, Todd McCarthy from The Hollywood Reporter, he's the real deal. He writes for a major news outlet who is included on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, The Hollywood Reporter, you can't get bigger than The Hollywood Reporter. And, you know, comparing to that, what do you have to, you know, share with the public, Rebecca? What do you know about film criticism and art criticism? And, you know, I think that is a fair question. I would ask that of myself if I was not myself. So I just have a little bit of a video that tells a little bit about my background and some of the things that I can bring to the table. I graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, with a degree in telecommunications and film and a focus on broadcast television production. While I've never been to film school, in my television and production experience, I've learned about and have lots of practice in operating cameras, shot composition, and editing. Lighting, green screen, and audio are my weak spots, admittedly, but I've been working on those. After working in local TV news, running cameras, and working in production, I got a job at Turner, now Warner Media, or whatever they're calling themselves now, for 14 years. I worked with networks, or brands as they call them now, like TBS, TNT, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, True TV, and Turner Classic Movies as a video encoding specialist. I also did a fair amount of closed captioning work and DVD and Blu-ray QC. In case you are wondering how I podcasted about Supergirl and the DCEU films while working for a Time Warner company, I actually got permission and clearance from my human resources representative. If you think I wouldn't criticize stories that were under the same corporate umbrella, that was never a problem nor a concern for me. If I thought the Supergirl TV series or a DCEU film had faults, I said so. In the last 17 years, I have served as a director, technical director, and camera operator at my local church in a live production capacity. I've been a video editor for 17 years, having worked in Avid, Final Cut, and Premiere Pro CC. In my day job, I shoot and edit news and documentary-style video content that involves interviews and narrative storytelling. I'm also currently an amateur photographer and am aiming to improve my efforts in still photography. You can check out my work over at Instagram at @TheDerbyKid. Link is in the video description below. While discussing these film reviews, music and film scores will inevitably come up. It may be good to know that in my life I have played piano, handbells, clarinet, bass clarinet, bassoon, acoustic guitar, and have even started learning how to play the ukulele. I've played in marching bands, symphonic bands, and wind ensembles, and have sung in many choirs. While I don't consider myself a world-class musician, far from it, actually, I do know some things about music and am a big fan of film scores and soundtracks. In addition to my production and musical experience, I have had lots of experience in art criticism. I've been podcasting about television and film since 2009 and do so on a regular basis with Supergirl Radio, a podcast I co-host about the CW Supergirl TV series. I am also a writing contributor to the Justice League Universe podcast that offers analysis on the DCEU films. You might even hear my voice occasionally in recordings and audio commentaries over there. I'm not an expert, but I care deeply about film, television, storytelling, and art. So I hope this gives you a background on where I'm coming from. If anyone is interested in an update on my ukulele playing, I now have a soprano ukulele that I bought at a pretty cheap price. And so I'm experimenting with the soprano ukulele as well. I have two concert ukuleles, a baritone ukulele, and a soprano. I don't have a tenor yet, so tenor is on the list. So I'm collecting ukuleles for the time being to try them all out. So that's been a lot of fun. And if anybody's interested in my video production skills, I've also recently bought an extension pole for my gimbal. So I'm very excited to try that. I've seen a lot of cool things just with, smartphone videos with gimbals and monopods, creative faking jib and drone shots. I'm very interested in trying some of that out. And highly recommend if anybody's interested. Also, I recently bought some movie LUTs from movieluts.com. I got the Batman v Superman movie LUT. It's perfect. I have no notes. It's great. So shout out to movieluts.com. I can now go out and create my own production with Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice coloring, and I'm so excited. So anyway, but that's not why anyone is here. We are here to read this review from Todd McCarthy at The Hollywood Reporter. So let's go ahead and get into his review. I like to start these with the title and kind of talk about the title and how some have creative titles and some don't. And maybe that's because the author wrote it, and maybe it's because their editor or someone else wrote it. Who knows that behind the scenes information. But this one is pretty plain and simple, pretty straightforward. It just says Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice : film review. I guess that helps you know exactly what it is. But I wish it was a little splashier and a little more creative, but it is what it is. The subheading, though, I think gives us a little bit more of information from this review. It says, the two superheroes face off in Zack Snyder's action extravaganza, the first in a proposed series of DC Extended Universe tentpoles. And so that one is a little bit more descriptive, I think. It at least goes into some more detail. I like that it calls BVS an extravaganza, which means a lavish or spectacular show or event. So I don't know. Reading that at the very top of the review, that makes me think that this is a positive review. Maybe this is a review that really liked the film and called it an extravaganza. But we'll see, we'll see what happens in the actual body of the review. But it's a little bit deceptive because it seems like a positive review at the top, but it's listed under the negative reviews over at Rotten Tomatoes. Okay, going into the review from Todd McCarthy, it says, "Quote." Nobody cares about Clark Kent taking on the Batman, the Daily Planet's editor dismissively remarks early on in the lumbering steamroller that is Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. But Warner Brothers devoutly prays that this sentiment is not the case. The studio has a great deal riding on this battle of culturally imperishable superheroes, the launchpad for its proposed series of DC Extended Universe tentpoles that it hopes will prove viable rivals to Marvel's vaunted cinematic goldmine of comic book figures turned film franchises. What I like about this opening paragraph, and there's very little that I like about it, but I do like that it starts with a line from the film, and I like that it is taking a little bit of a creative stance on the introduction and the opening. It quotes Perry White here, and I like that. I really like that it does some effort here. I don't think the rest of the paragraph does, but at least in the opening sentence, it does something. It makes something of an effort in trying to represent the merit of the film or the substance of the film. However, the rest of it does not. Most of the opening of this review already tells me that this is not going to be about the merit or the content of the film because it wants to talk about the studio's business decisions. It references Warner Brothers. It references the studio and having a great deal riding on it. Talks about the launch pad for the tent poles and talks about the rivalry with Marvel. None of that has anything to do with the merit of the film. So that's pretty disappointing. So I can kind of see where this is going already. Todd is comparing Dawn of Justice in the DCU to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In this opening, I mean, sometimes it takes a little while to get into the body and the substance of these reviews, but right off the gate, right out of the gate, Todd wants to bring up the MCU. And what's really interesting to me is that these reviewers, they never mention how the MCU didn't start off as a gold mine. I don't know if a lot of people remember that. I sure do. I remember when Iron Man came out, I was excited about it. I went to go see it in the theater. I remember, I saw every MCU film in the theater, up through Ant-Man. Ant-Man, I've said many times in these live streams, that was the clincher. I just had to stop after that. But the phase one, there were some stinkers. People don't remember that. Captain America, the First Avenger, you know how much money it made worldwide? $300 million worldwide. It barely made any money. I think its budget was like $150 million. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that being talked about at all? I can't. I don't know anybody who talks about that. Phase one was mostly a bunch of stinkers. Iron Man did pretty well, but it wasn't like this huge hit. I mean, it was a hit, but it wasn't like breaking records. It made money. People liked it, but it wasn't a gold mine then. Iron Man 2 did okay. It was good. People liked it. It made some money. Captain America, the First Avenger, I would not call that a box office success. Thor did okay. I don't think it was a huge box office success. That the Edward Norton Hulk, not a box office success. The MCU was not a box office gold mine until the Avengers, that first Avengers film. Or I would call it a movie. I talk about films when there's actually I try to separate those out. I try to think about films actually trying to be cinematic. The first Avengers, I thought that was mediocre at best. And I said it when I walked out of the theater and people looked at me funny. And I was like, those people were phoning it in on this one. And I was so excited about it. But people never talk about, these reviewers never talk about what the phase one of the MCU was. The actual comparison here needs to be phase one of the MCU to the first couple of films in the DCEU. The DCEU made a lot more money, a lot better box office success, better box office returns than early phase one MCU. Nobody talks about that. They don't want to because, facts speak for themselves. So I think it is it's telling here that Todd doesn't reference that. They want to compare post Avengers MCU to to Batman v Superman, which is not even a close call. And even then, BVS made what, $872 million at the box office. Do you know how close that is to $1 billion? That is so close. So it made a lot of money despite the 27% on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know what it is now, but at one point it was like 27%. It had low critic scores and it made almost $900 million at the box office. That's not even a fair comparison. So I think that's a bunch of bunk. So I think it's interesting that Todd is burying that information. He's not mentioning that here in this opening section. Okay, I'm gonna hop into the chat real quick. V's with Ease, which I think is a really cool name. Thanks for joining me. It says it's been a while. Love any Zack Snyder praise. Hey, you've come to the right channel. If you want people to talk about Zack Snyder, I am your gal. I love Zack Snyder films. He's one of my favorite filmmakers, and I try to learn a lot from his style and the way he sees filmmaking. And he actually, I think a lot about some of his advice. There was one piece of advice he gave in an interview that I think about all the time. I mean, all the time. I shoot video for my day job, and I fancy myself an amateur photographer, but I'm not very good. But I think about what he said one time. I think about it every time I get behind a camera. When I'm running a camera at church or when I'm shooting something to edit later, he said the advice was he basically said your perspective is the greatest asset you can have. And I think about that all the time because nobody can see out of your eyes. Nobody can see out of my eyes. I'm the only one who can see out of my eyes. So whatever I show you about how I see the world, that's my perspective. And whatever you show me through your eyes is how you see the world. And that's unique to you. If V's with Ease and I took the same picture, it would probably or use the same subject as a picture, we would probably have different pictures that came out of it. So I think about that advice all the time. And I just want to pass it around and continue sharing that because I think it's such good advice. So yeah, Zack Snyder, love him as a filmmaker. He's such an artist. Okay. I'm going to keep going down. David says, an honest review should be able to conclude that a movie is nice or good, but also be alienating, or that it's crowd pleasing but vapid, instead of studio and market digging. Yeah, in terms of the way I review films, I try to. There's something to be said about history and about putting films in a context. So I get that, but when you're actually critiquing a film, I think in a news story, like an editorial or a news story, you can put that context in. There's a place for that. But in a film, a critique of a film, a critique of art should not put that in there, in my opinion, because that has nothing to do with the film. The film is its own thing. It stands alone. It doesn't matter, when people talk about I'm trying to think if there's a film that I can think of real quick. It's a Wonderful Life. Critics didn't like it back when it came out, but there's a different. The audience reaction is different because they're actually looking at the film and thinking about the film and what it presents, whereas the filmmaker, the critics, were probably not thinking about that. So I just I make it a standard policy for myself that I try to put all of that aside, and I just look at the first frame of video or the first frame of the film until the last frame of the credits. What did that film show me? What did that book tell me? What did that TV show present to me? And that way I can judge everything based on that same standard, and I don't have to bring up all that other stuff. Um, so I think it's a bad way of reviewing a film. But today, if you read most of these reviews, they will have that historical context in there, but they'll leave other historical context out. We noticed that the MCU Phase 1, they didn't mention those box office returns. No, don't bring up how much money Captain America, the first Avenger, made worldwide. Don't bring that number up. We don't want that historical context. No, no, no. But so that's kind of now the formula for some of these things. I think it's a big mistake. So that'll be something that we'll talk about after I finish talking about these reviews, which I feel like I'm pretty close. I don't know exactly how many we have left to do, but we're pretty close. So after I finish all the ones that I want to talk about from 2016, we'll talk about art criticism today and how maybe we can fix it. I think there are some suggestions that we can work through and brainstorm about to see if we can fix it. All right. Let's see. David mentions that the Incredible Hulk did under 400 too. Yeah, it didn't do well. It wasn't a hit. I liked it. I thought it was pretty good, but it wasn't a gold mine. Let's see. David also says, I'm just kind of going through the chat. Says, I think I mentioned this on the last live stream, but the $1 billion bar is so arbitrary. No one but me cared that Civil War made 400 million less than Avengers 2012, despite having more characters, including Spider-Man. Yeah, I guess the studio maybe thought putting Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman in a film would be an automatic $1 billion, but who said that? Who said that? And why did these critics care so much about that? There are so few movies, so few films that actually make $1 billion. It's a very short list. So I don't know why we all have this assumption that these big movies that come out are supposed to make $1 billion. That's so rare. So it's very strange. Okay, let's see. Dennis says The Searchers, it was hated back in the day, but now is regarded as a classic, and it inspired the 1970s generation of filmmakers like George Lucas, John Milius, and Steven Spielberg. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I remember, so I used to work at, well, I don't know what they call themselves these days, but back in my day, I worked at Turner Broadcasting. Eventually we became Turner, and then I think at some point we got called Warner Media Group. But when I was still working there, it was Turner. And I used to watch a lot of Turner Classic Movies DVDs because I would QC them, make sure all the DVD buttons worked and all the video and the audio was correct and all the menus did what they were supposed to do. So I was basically checking them to make sure they were okay. So it gave me the opportunity to watch these classic films that I haven't seen. And some of the bonus features on those discs, you probably buy them off TCM's website, and they probably still sell them, I guess. But a lot of the way that those DVDs were structured is you would have to read a lot for those TCM DVDs. It took me a long time to QC those because I'd have to read through all of the text and make sure things were capitalized like they were supposed to. Maybe check the punctuation, but they would present some of the historical context. I assume these were just things they pulled from the TCM's website and included them in the bonus features, but it would talk about the historical context of this, just for an example, like a film from 1939. What's the historical context from a film historian perspective? And it was always interesting to me to read those because there were things I was like, yeah, okay, I see that. I get that. But it's just funny how film, especially film, if it's a good film, it will transcend time. There are some films from the 1930s where I'm like, ugh, that did not age well. There's a Claudette Colbert film that I watched in one of those DVDs that I QC'd, and I don't remember the title of it. Somebody can go to IMDb and find it. But there's a film where she plays this character who has a lady who cooks for her in her house. So she's kind of this rich woman who has a like a live-in housemaid cook, and the cook is really good at cooking, I think, pancakes or waffles or something. And Claudette Colbert steals the recipe and sort of makes it her own thing and becomes this huge success. And it felt like something that was sort of like the Aunt Jemima controversy and all that kind of stuff. And I just remember thinking, wow, this came out in the 1930s like this. Today, it does not hold up. That is not good. But to know that historical context, there are some films where it's good to have that historical context, because then you can understand what the people who in that day, maybe what they were thinking, even though that would differ from what we think now, and how we've progressed as a society. So that historical context is interesting to me and is needed for those films, 60, 70 years in the future, to know what those people were doing back then. That's important. But the historical context for film reviewers and film critics who are doing it in the moment, they don't have the actual knowledge for how this is going to hold up 20 years from now. And it's interesting to me because Zack Snyder films tend to hold up really well in the future. When Watchmen came out, it was the reception, I think, was okay. I loved it. I had read the book before I went to go see the film, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is just like the graphic novel. I mean, there's a couple of changes, but I mean, when I saw it, I was like, I know that ship, I know those characters. And so I loved it. And so that was kind of the first time I had watched something by Zack Snyder. So that was like the beginning of my interest in his filmmaking. And it wasn't a huge box office hit. It didn't do big numbers, but now, after I think it's like 14 years old now, came out in 2009. I'm starting to see people come out with these articles like 10 years after Watchmen, how it's holding up today. I mean, you can probably find those if you search for them on the interwebs. But the tide turns a little bit with Zack Snyder films. The historical context 20 years from now is gonna, and I'm gonna mark this down, time code this. 20 years from now, people are gonna look back at Zack Snyder's run on DC films, and that it's gonna be looked back fondly, because people are gonna be like, people who are like getting into films now, they're gonna be making films, and they're gonna look back and they're gonna say, hey, that really inspired me when I was a kid. I thought that was really cool. And now I'm making films, and I'm trying to make films like that because it was so cool when I was a kid, and I was very inspired by that. The tides will turn on these Zack Snyder films, but you won't know that until 20, 30 years from the future when Turner Classic Movies is talking about it. So I say all that, and I'm very long-winded about that, because that's why I don't talk about the I try, when I review something, I try not to talk about the historical context of things in the moment, because in the moment you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to be perceived. But I guess there is something to be said about knowing how these people felt about BVS in 2016. So then in 2030, see what people are talking about Batman v Superman in 2030, because they're still going to be talking about it. I guarantee you, people still talk about Batman v Superman. What is that? 7 years from now? I was trying to remember what year it was. So I'm very curious to see in the future, because I see the tides already turning anyway. So it's very interesting. There will be a nostalgia factor that will come on down the road, where people will be talking about Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and Wonder Woman 2017 with great nostalgia. People will be looking back fondly on it, even if they didn't in 2016. I'd be curious to hear what Todd's thoughts are 15 years down the road. So I guess that's all I'll say about that. But I just, as a word of warning to future film critics, there's a pro and a con to talking about the historical context. Do you want to be that person who says they hated It's a Wonderful Life when it came out? Do you want to be that person? just think about it. Just think about it. Okay. Let's see. Dennis also says a lot of directors don't know what they want to do. Every director I've seen that was a good director that I've admired knew exactly what he wanted to do. And that's a quote from John Milius. Yeah, that goes back to that conversation about perspective. I think directors' brains, like really good directors, they have a brain and a perspective that's different from everyone else. So I think that's really cool. Let's see. Dennis also mentions a quote from Scott Derrickson saying, "Watchmen is the modern day Blade Runner." Wow. You'll have to send me a link to that. I'll have to find that out, but track that down and find it. But that's really, really interesting. David also says, with our luck, Turner Classic Movies would still only show the theatrical cut of BVS. Well, the thing about TCM is that it's uncut and commercial free, so they can air whatever they want to. That's the beauty of TCM. I'm very disillusioned with a lot of the Turner networks and some of the Turner brands, but TCM, I've always loved TCM. I discovered classic film when I was in 7th grade. I guess that would have put me in 13 years old, 12, 13 years old. And I fell in love with Fred and Ginger movies. And that's when I was like, huh, these people in the 30s actually did some pretty cool stuff. So that made me love classic movies and want to watch them. So yeah, TCM would probably be able to show the uncut Ultimate Edition. So I don't worry about that. If it was shown on TNT, it would probably be the theatrical cut, but TCM doesn't have to worry about that. Let's see. Although I don't work there anymore, so I have no idea. I don't know if they've changed those things. Let's see. Okay, all right. Well, we haven't even really dug into this. We've talked a lot about film history and film criticism, but let's get back to the review while we are at it. Okay, so continuing on with Todd's thoughts. He writes, quote, opening this weekend on roughly 4,000 screens domestically and 30,000 worldwide, this dramatically dark and physically gigantic venture is estimated to need to haul in $1 billion at the very least to justify itself financially and pave the way for the flood of WB/DC outings already set for release over the next 4 years. With significantly stronger international than domestic results likely, it may well earn its keep. But after Man of Steel 3 years ago, the studio had to know what it was getting with director Zack Snyder. The film may be imposing, but it's not fun, unquote. I like how much speculation is in this paragraph. It may well earn its keep. I have no idea. Todd McCarthy, I have no idea how well it's going to doing, but it might make money. I have no idea, but I'm going to talk about it in this review. I love how it's just Todd is making stuff up. He doesn't know. And then he ends this with, it's not fun. We'll get to that. So this second paragraph continues to talk about the business side of things, listing out how many screens are showing the film, what the budget was kind of, he talks about what it would have needed to justify itself. So he's sort of throwing in the budget in there, even though he doesn't use the word budget. And then he's talking about the expected box office return of $1 billion. I don't know where he got that. I don't know if he talked to a WB executive. I have no idea. He could be making it up. He made some other stuff up in this paragraph. So who knows? There might have been just an assumption that it needed to make $1 billion. So I really don't like how much this is the second paragraph into this quote review. And we haven't really even discussed the film. 2 paragraphs in. It's a real shame. This is not a film. This is not a film review. This is an article about the film's business, which is fine. It's a very valid thing for the Hollywood Reporter to do an article on about the business side of BVS and its release. But this should not be in a film review. This is not a film review. This is an article talking about the business side of the film. None of this, I think, in my opinion, has any place in a film review. All right, so let's see. Let me keep going into my notes. Oh, yes. So he says BVS isn't fun. So let's just say, even if that were true, and I don't think it is, because I have plenty of fun watching Batman v Superman. Even if that were true, that it isn't fun, why does it need to be fun? Why does any film need to be fun? Who is requiring that? Who says that? Who set that standard? Think about all the great the great films that you've seen. How many of them were fun? I've seen a lot of films that were bleak and dark. And they were awesome films. They were great films. 2001: A Space Odyssey is a weird movie. It's long and there's nothing much fun about it. It's in space, but there's like a crazy psycho robot in there. And then don't want to spoil the ending, but there's a weird thing that happens at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's not a lot of fun. It's kind of a weird movie. And it's very long and it's strange. But dang it, I like watching 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's beautiful. It's friggin' beautiful, especially on the Blu-ray. It's so gorgeous. How many films can you think? I'm just putting that out to everyone. How many films can you think of that you thought were great films, but they weren't fun? There's a lot of them. So I don't know who says that films have to be fun. Blade Runner. We talked about Blade Runner. How fun is Blade Runner? How many times are you laughing during Blade Runner? Probably not much. That's a pretty bleak movie. So I think it's so strange that anyone would say that any movie has to be fun. And even if Todd is saying that, oh, this is a superhero film, this is a comic book movie, it needs to be fun because it's a comic book movie. It's got guys in capes and they have superpowers. Who says those have to be fun? Who says they have to have jokes? Nobody. Nobody says you have to do anything. You can make a film any way you want it to be. That annoys me so much. And Dennis asks a question. Furthermore, what is fun? Yeah. Define that for me. One of the comedians that I used to follow a lot, she's a stand-up named Jen Kirkman. And she used to say, because she used to have a podcast. I don't think she does this one anymore, but she used to have a podcast called I Seem Fun. You can look it up. And her thing was, everyone's fun is different. What Jen Kirkman thinks is fun, I might not think is fun. What Dennis thinks is fun, I might not think is fun. He might not think what I think is fun to him. Everybody's fun is different. I have a lot of fun watching BVS. Wonder Woman saving Batman is awesome. I love getting to see Lois Lane in Africa. I love that rooftop scene. That's fun for me. To dissect that dialogue, to look at those visuals, that's fun for me. If you don't think that's fun, that's not your thing. But you can't tell somebody else, oh, well, this isn't fun. They may think it's fun. It's kind of, in my opinion, a silly way to describe any film. Because it's very subjective. But calling BVS not fun, Todd thinks it wasn't fun. But that doesn't mean that BVS is not fun. So, That's just I guess what I'll say about that. Let's see. Dennis also says, fun classic film fact. Back in the 1970s, Audie Murphy wanted to buy the rights to his Red Badge of Courage and release John Hudson's original vision for it. I'll have to check that out. And saying, dude essentially tried to make a Snyder cut of Red Badge of Courage. Huh. Interesting. Okay. I'll have to check that out. So we have some films. Some great films that you might not think are fun. I like this. Yes, let's list these out. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on them. Seven. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, Seven. What a fun movie. What a fun film. Just a barrel of laughs, right? But it's a great film. Apocalypse Now got a lot of stuff going on there. Platoon, Shawshank Redemption. Yeah, Chinatown, Schindler's List, Double Indemnity. Man, those 40s noir movies. Jeez, so good. Great films. All great films. Don't have to be fun. Let's see. Dennis also says maybe it's because it's a superhero movie and it's not a real movie to these people. Huh. I'm going to have to marinate on that. Maybe so. That's a good point. Maybe there's because I've always kind of thought that some of these film critics look down on some of these comic book films because maybe they've gotten burned out from having to talk about them for the 23rd Marvel movie. They're over it by now, and so they just take it out on every other thing that's listed as a comic book movie. And so they would rather be reviewing some French movie with subtitles that's about some super artistic thing that nobody really understands, but everybody says they like it. It's that Ocean Walker thing from Arrested Development season 3. You should watch it. It's great. But I think there is a shunning of these films from critics because they think they're not worth talking about. Which is so strange to me because a film like BVS has so much rich dialogue and layered storytelling and impressive cinematic visuals that actually also help tell the story. As a film critic, I would think people would eat that up. I actually walked out of BVS when I first saw it. There was a fan screening. I think it was like a Thursday night, maybe before the film came out. No, it was a Monday. I think it was a Monday night. And I remember going to see it and I walked out thinking, man, that was so good. Even on the first viewing, I was like, wow, that was so good. Critics are going to love this. And then the reviews came out and I was like, what? So I think there is a snobbish reaction from some of these critics. And Venkata says is she with you? I thought she was with you. Is Snyder and Terrio level humor and fun? Yeah, there's plenty of if you're looking for jokes or banter or levity, little bits of humor, it's in BVS. The background I'm using from Perry White is an example of comedic relief. He and Alfred and Martha Kent, those characters are used as comedic relief. There's tons of that in the film. But you have to not be force-fed banter like you do in the MCU. It's a different kind of humor. It's a different kind of comedy. You have to understand it through the eyes of characters and situations. But yeah, there's a lot of great humor. I actually argued that in a panel at DragonCon, and a guy in the audience called me a liar because he said there was only one joke in the movie. Look it up. I got a video of it on my channel. You can go check it out. Let's see. Dennis also asked, was the Dark Knight trilogy fun? There's a lot of serious stuff going on there. Rachel getting blown up was certainly not very fun. That was rough goings. Let's see. Oh, Dennis also says, as someone who comes from Brazil, a country with high crime rates, Batman beating up those criminals was really fun to me. See? It's a different kind of fun. It is fun to see Batman punch evil in the face. Kevin Smith talks about that. It's fun to see Batman punch evil in the face. I'm into it. Okay. All right, so let's get back into the review. Thank you to everybody sharing your thoughts. All right. Todd continues saying, quote, the main issue facing the writers of a superhero smackdown like this is concocting a reason why, given all the evil out there, they have to fight each other, as well as, in this case, coming up with a way to level the playing field when one hero is essentially immortal and the other is just a really buff guy with a costume and lots of gizmos. Screenwriters Chris Terrio from Argo and David S. Goyer, all three of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight blockbusters, have sort of solved this by devising ways to make Superman more frequently vulnerable than he's ever been before. But the villain here, Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, is so intensely annoying that very early on, you wish Batman and Superman would just patch up their differences and join forces to put the squirrely rascal out of his and our misery, unquote. Well, actually, that's kind of what happens in a sort of an indirect way. Lex Luthor does end up in jail at the end of BBS, and Batman and Superman do patch up their differences and join forces. Of course, it ends with Superman's death and that kind of thing. But Todd does sort of gets what he wants here. I do like, this is what the third paragraph in the review. It took the third paragraph before he actually started talking about the merit of the film and what the film was actually about. So I appreciate that he's talking about the writing here. So we're finally getting some film thoughts. So to me, it's interesting that Todd lays out the challenge of writing a film about two superheroes fighting, but never says how well he thought the writing actually justified their aggression against each other. Did he think how would he rate it? He put the challenge out there and the problem of how that is, but he didn't talk about how the film resulted. How did it fare during that challenge? Did Batman v Superman effectively give reasons for why they would be at odds? I mean, I think so, but Todd doesn't even answer that question. I think those reasons are layered and complex. It's not just about Batman blaming Superman for what happened during the Black Zero event, although that is on the surface. But it's also about Bruce dealing with the powerlessness he felt as a child, the powerlessness he feels in his 20 years as Batman, because he talks about how criminals grow like weeds, and ultimately the powerlessness he feels as a human man going up against a godlike being. I think those are really great reasons for the two of them to fight each other. But Todd never answers whether or not he thought it was effective or not. He could have just implied that it didn't do very well in terms of facing that challenge in the writing, but he never answers that. He just puts the challenge out there and never talks about it. I'd also like to know why Todd thought that Lex Luthor was annoying. I'm sure that I could guess why, but he never clearly states why that is. And I'm also confused by a comment like this. I mean, are we supposed to love Lex Luthor? Are we supposed to enjoy his presence? I mean, there are some Lex Luthors, I guess, that have a little bit of charisma or have something in them that you like. But I think Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor has that. I think there's a part, I shouldn't say a part of me. All of me can sympathize with his Lex Luthor and the trauma and some of the abuse that he dealt with from his father that he talks about up on that roof with Superman. I can understand why he does what he does, but I don't have to love him. I actually think it's good that you hate him. I think, Todd, I think it's great that you found him annoying. He should be annoying. Most Lex Luthors are annoying. So I don't see that as a negative at all. I think that's actually a very positive thing. All right, let me hop in here to see if anybody's talking about these things in the chat. Invictus Bat says if Zack's cut had been released in the theaters, it would have done much better critically, and I think it would have made the billion. It's tough to know for sure, but I wish we could have seen it. I wish maybe that. I mean, that's a risk for the studio, I guess, to put out a 3.5-hour film. But it might have made a difference. I don't know. Who's to say? We don't know for sure. But I think once the Ultimate Edition did come out, I think there was very clearly a different take on the film. People thought it was much better than the theatrical version. So, already just having seen some of the reaction post the Ultimate Edition, people did change their minds on it. Dennis says, I would pay to see a Perry White movie, just him snarking at Clark and Lois for 2 hours. Sign me up. I'm into it. Yeah, Dennis also says Luther is something called a villain. Those tend to be unlikable. Yeah, you're not supposed to love Lex. Even Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor, who might be one of the most popular Lex Luthors. Like, I don't know that he was an interesting, complicated character, but I don't know that I loved everything he did. I wasn't supposed to. Let's see. Venkata says the Lex Luthor in BVS is more of a Riddler, cheap copy of Heath's Joker from TDK. It's a comment a lot of haters. The comment. I think what Venkata is saying here, that the comment that Lex Luthor in BVS is a copy of Riddler and the cheap copy of Heath's Joker. Heath Ledger's Joker was a comment that a lot of haters made and didn't make sense to Venkata. I think that's what it's trying to say. I really honestly, I think it's a superficial connection. They see the red hair, that sort of shoulder length hair. Heath Ledger's Joker had that shoulder length hair. I think that's it. I literally think that's it. Is the hair. I think people see the similar hairstyle, and that's the connection. Because it actually, from a storytelling perspective, it makes no sense at all. I don't think there's any way you can compare Lex Luthor and BVS to the Joker from The Dark Knight. Because Joker operated on chaos. He was a dog chasing an ambulance, and he didn't know what to do with it if he caught it. Just chaos. The Joker is a being of chaos, especially in The Dark Knight. Well, Lex Luthor in BVS is very calculated. He plans out everything. He's a mastermind. He's a criminal mastermind, like Gene Hackman's Lex said about himself in the Donnerverse movies, even though I don't think he really was. But Lex Luthor in BVS really lived up to that criminal mastermind bit. He played everybody like a violin, except for maybe Lois Lane. But they couldn't be two different characters. I mean, they're completely different characters. So yeah, I think it's just the hair. It's the strangest thing. That and also the Riddler. I think the hair comes into play with that Riddler comparison too, because in Batman Forever with Jim Carrey's Riddler, guess what? He has that shoulder length red hair. Put those three visually together next to each other. That's why they say that. I think it's literally just the hair. Okay. All right, let's go back into the review. Todd says, quote, the story does take an epic, rangy perspective as the long setup jumps from one far-flung locale to another to establish pockets of evil, while also dramatizing Bruce Wayne's backstory, here conceived as seeing his parents gunned down in the street after emerging from a theater showing Excalibur. Seemingly disconnected worldwide events, Metropolis being destroyed as a huge spacecraft with claws hangs overhead. Claws? Yeah, I mean, I guess it was more of like a sort of spider-looking thing. What was his name? John Peters always wanted the big spider. So I don't know that I would describe that ship as a spacecraft with claws. I mean, I guess it is, but that's not how I would first describe it. Hangs overhead. Lois Lane, played by Amy Adams, on assignment in Africa. Criminals threatening wider destruction with a dirty bomb are mixed in with Bruce, Ben Affleck fitting the role just fine, brooding over his place in the world and his legacy, to which his butler Alfred, Jeremy Irons, who could use more to do, replies with perhaps the film's best line, even you've grown too old to die young. I like that he puts dialogue from the film in here. It shows that maybe he paid attention, but he could have also just taken these 2 lines from a BBS trailer. I think both of those were in a trailer, so it could be that he never actually watched the film. He just pulled from the trailer and assumed some things. I don't know. Some of these reviews sort of feel like they read kinda like that, but I guess I'll assume that Todd actually watched the film, but I do like he put the, dialogue in here. However, does Todd really think that what happened in Africa and, Batman's search for the white Portuguese, does he think that they're disconnected? Because they aren't. They're actually both part of Lex Luthor's plans to frame and kill Superman. Those are very connected. They're not seemingly disconnected. They are connected. Um, this section also reads as if Todd, I don't know why I said Tom, Todd is complimenting Ben Affleck here, saying that he fits the role of Batman slash Bruce Wayne just fine. So I would take that as a win. I think that's a compliment. He also complains about Jeremy Irons' Alfred not having anything to do, which is strange to me because this version of Alfred in BVS has more to do than any other cinematic version ever on film. And Todd thinks he needs more to do. Alfred serves as a soundboard for Bruce. He helps build Batman's armored suit. He repairs the Batmobile. He brainstorms with Bruce about ways to get into Lex's party. And while Bruce is at said party, Alfred is chiming in on the comms, helping him navigate the building. And, I guess there is that thing about how he remotely flies the Batwing when Batman goes to the warehouse. So doesn't have anything to do. He even at one point he's like chopping wood. He has a lot of things to do. He has so much to do. He's probably the most active of all the Alfreds that have ever been put on the big screen. So I don't understand why he's talking about that. Very, very bizarre. Let's see. I'll hop into the chat real quick. I think I'm running long, so I'll try to hit as many comments as I can. Let's see. Yeah, Dennis says Joker also makes his plans as he goes along while Luthor's doing everything with a purpose. Correct. I agree. So yeah, that comparison never made sense to me either. All right, continuing on. Todd writes, quote, the solemn, grandiose atmosphere is severely disrupted by Luthor, portrayed by Eisenberg as a privileged tech guru who makes the actor's take on Mark Zuckerberg look like the epitome of style and manners. Loaded with vocal tics and gushing with smarmy, I don't know that word, ripostus. Somebody check me on that. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that. I'll have to check that out. Actually, let me look that up real quick. So this word repost, I guess, is how it is said. A quick thrust given after parrying an opponent's lunge in fencing. A retaliatory action, maneuver, or retort. Oh, so Todd must be a fencer here. I like that he used a fencing term, though, for Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is usually tied to fencing. Smallville had him fencing quite a bit. I think even on Supergirl, Lena Luthor was also a fencer. So those, I don't know if that was intentional on Todd's part, but it actually fits. All right, so yeah. So it's a fencing move. A retaliatory verbal sally. A retaliatory move. So let me read that in context again. And gushing with smarmy retaliatory moves and threats, the character is loathsome without an ounce of insidious charm. And if the legacy of the studio's Dark Knight films might have suggested anything, it should have been in the area of great villains. But here is there is just a great vacuum, unquote. Okay. So lots to dig into here. So should Batman v Superman be solemn? I mean, Todd says it is solemn. Should it be solemn? So for me, if I'm going to talk about the word solemn, I'm going to look at the definition, see what it actually means, and see how it fits with BVS. So the definition of solemn means it's marked by the invocation of a religious sanction. That's interesting in a film that has a lot of Christian imagery. It means it's somber, means it's gloomy, it means it's marked by grave sedateness and earnest sobriety, and it means it's awe-inspiring. Well, I think it's actually very fitting that Batman v Superman is solemn. I think given the story and the characters and the dialogues and the journeys they go through, yeah, That fits. It's not a negative thing to say that BBS is solemn. That's correct. That's accurate. It's also pretty clear, because he's really harping on Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor here. So it's pretty clear to me that Todd did not like his Lex Luthor. But it's interesting to me because one of the things I always advise people to do when they're reviewing something, ask the question why. Why did somebody make this character say this dialogue? Why do they do this in the story? Why does this actor portray them that way? Everything in a film, everything in a TV show is a choice someone is making. Why do they make those choices? The question why is such a good way to dig into something. And I really recommend that people ask the question why, because you might just you might start superficially here, but when you ask the question why, you start digging things. You start finding things out. You start thinking about it a little more because you've looked into all the layers that you're digging up. But Todd doesn't do this here. He doesn't ask why Jesse Eisenberg is playing Lex the way he does, or why he's written the way he is. Why does he make the choices that he makes? Todd doesn't ask that. Maybe if he did, he would come to a different conclusion, or at least a conclusion to where he understood it. But he doesn't ask the question. Todd wants a great villain and is disappointed that he didn't get one in BVS, even though Jesse Eisenberg's Lex is calculated and so villainous. He throws Lois Lane off of a skyscraper. He orchestrates the Capitol bombing. He attacks the government. He kills senators. What do you want from him? He kills Superman. He created Doomsday. He manipulated Batman's emotions. What about that is not a good villain? Even at the end, he calls Steppenwolf. He creates a being who's supposed to not be created because the Council of Krypton said, hey, don't do that. That's bad. Don't do that. What do you want from him? That sounds like a great villain to me. Man, he does some bad stuff in BVS. And he actually won. At the end of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, he got what he wanted. To a degree. He wanted the world to hate Superman. They actually ended up loving and respecting Superman by the end. But at least he got to kill Superman. Superman was dead. He thought he had killed God. At the end of BVS, Lex thinks he won. That's rare. That is so rare for a villain in these kinds of movies. God, I just love Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. He's such a good villain. He's like top tier villain for me. So I totally disagree with Todd on this. But Todd doesn't even address all that stuff. Maybe it's because he thinks he can't talk about it because it'll be spoilery. But he just mentions that he doesn't like the way Jesse plays him, but he doesn't talk about all the stuff that Lex does. It's funny how that is, right? All right, so continuing on, Todd writes, quote, for his part, Batman is provided with plentiful backstory and psychology, but the mature character as written never comes into full bloom. All the same, one can look ahead with some hope to Affleck in the role of future installments. Cavill is also likable enough, but again, hamstrung by the twisty, convoluted inventions designed to limit his abilities during long stretches, unquote. I think it's funny that, reviews like this written by Todd were the reason that Affleck didn't get to do many future installments as Batman. It's because of stuff like this. It's because of reviews like this. Yeah. So thanks. Thanks for that. The historical context is getting worse by the minute. So that's ironic, I guess. Is it Alanis Morissette? Is it ironic or just strange? I don't know. Someone let me know. So Todd here says that Batman never comes into, quote, full bloom, unquote. I would love to know why Todd thinks that. I wish I had a fuller explanation of that, because Bruce actually goes through an entire arc in the film in which he starts out as having been disillusioned by his superhero life, and he's mad at the world. And because of that, he ends up, doing all these bad things. He's branding criminals. He's he's doing things that Batman maybe wouldn't have normally done. He's got new rules. So he starts off that way, and over the course of the film, he ends up inspired by Superman to have hope. And then he forms a team based on that hope that they can stop a threat so that they can protect the world from that threat. So what doesn't come into full bloom? He has an arc that is seen through the end. He's a fallen man at the beginning of the film, and he comes into a redeemed situation where he realizes the error of his ways. That seems like full bloom to me. I also wonder what Todd meant by, quote, twisty, convoluted inventions, unquote. Does anybody have any thoughts? The only thing I can think of is that maybe he's talking about the kryptonite spear, but I honestly have no idea, so I would just be guessing on that. Anybody else's guess is as good as mine because Todd did not elaborate. Let's see. Going back into the chat really quickly, Venkata says Alfred is also the one who tries to talk sense into the new rules that Batman has and says Superman is not the enemy. Yeah, Alfred's great in BVS. He's so good. He's the one trying to rein Bruce back in. He's trying to help him in many, many different ways. But Alfred is very much the moral compass in the situation. Yeah, I love Jeremy Irons as Alfred. He's so good. And that's true to Alfred as a character. Dennis says Alfred is the voice of reason. That's his main thing. Bruce as Batman punches evil in the face. Alfred, his thing is he's going to be the voice of reason. No matter what he gets to do. Michael Caine's Alfred, the voice of reason. Michael Go's Alfred is the voice of reason. That's kind of the main function is Alfred Pennyworth. But I love that he gets to be more active and does things in BVS that he isn't shown to do in interpretations before him. Let's see. Dennis also says BVS is a movie where two savior figures are tricked to fight to the death by a devil figure. Oh, I like that that interpretation. Yeah. And Dennis says, because of that, I think it should be tragic. Yeah, I mean, these reviews disregard the actual context of the story. They disregard what the story is actually doing, what the film should be. They want it to be fun, but what is the actual context of the story? Is that it's leading to the death of Superman. Why should that be fun? That should be sad. That should be solemn. You're not going to oh, I had so much fun. You can have fun laughing at Perry White. But as a whole, the story is supposed to be serious and sad and solemn. There are three funerals, really, in this film. The Wayne funeral, Clark's funeral, and Superman's funeral. Just three, if I counted correctly. There's three funerals in this thing. It's supposed to be solemn. You have to look at what a film is instead of what you want it to be. That's the opposite of film reviews or film critics, art criticism. You should always be criticizing or critiquing what it actually is, what it's trying to be, not what you want it to be. Not everything is your fan fiction, it's there's so many things I wish they could be differently, but there are tons of films where I'm like, well, I wouldn't have made that choice, but that was a good film. Or I didn't like that, but I have to admit that was a good film. Or I really loved that movie, but boy, is it not that great. You have to just look at things, in my opinion, reviewers should look at things for what they are and what they're trying to be and what they present themselves to be. That's the mistake I see in a lot of these reviews. Let's see. David says, and in the end, the people may love Superman, but they won't be able to do anything in the face of the first phase of the invasion. No, that will fall on the individual hero's shoulders again. That's a good point. Let's see. Yeah, and David says 3 funerals. Um, yeah, not everything is your fan fiction. Quote me on it. Not everything is supposed to be your fan fiction. Because we're seeing the perspective. We started this live stream talking about Zack Snyder's perspective. And this is his perspective. This is the story he wanted to tell. So we have to look at BVS according to the story that he's telling and the way the visuals help tell the story. I think a lot of people miss this about Zack Snyder is that the visuals are also helping to tell the story. So you're seeing his take on these characters in this universe through what we're being presented. It's not about, oh, what would Dick Donner have done? It's not about, oh, how would Smallville have done this? This film is directed by Zack Snyder. It's written by David S. Goyer and Chris Terrio, mostly Chris Terrio because he rewrote a lot of it. This is their perspective. This is their take. So in my opinion, a film critic has to look at it through those lenses, I guess, that you have to look through those perspectives to see what they're doing. That's why, just as another example from a different medium, I love the comic book story Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. And it's kind of controversial. It's written by Tom King and it's controversial because some Supergirl fans don't like the way that Supergirl is portrayed in it. I happen to love it. Surprise, surprise. I'm kind of a minority opinion in a lot of these things. But the thing that I love about it is that I'm getting to see what Tom King thinks about Supergirl through that story. I understand how Tom King thinks about Supergirl because that's how he's telling that story. And that's what I really, really love about it. Because, I mean, obviously I guess part of the reason I like it is that what he thinks about Supergirl is what I think about Supergirl. But it's cool. It's a different take. It's a different interpretation of her backstory, about her story, her characterization, because that's how Tom King sees Supergirl. That might differ from how Starling Gates sees her or how Otto Bender saw her. It's a different thing. How Steve Orlando saw her. All these Jeff Loeb wrote some Supergirl. It's a different interpretation. It's a different take. So you have to think about it in those terms because you can't compare the Donnerverse with Richard Donner and Zack Snyder. They're two different filmmakers telling different stories, doing different things. So that's what kind of annoys me about people wanting things to be what they want it to be. A lot of these people wanted the Christopher Reeve Superman. They wanted all of that stuff. They wanted the MCU, but that's not what it was. It was never meant to be that. So it really bothers me. Let's see. Oh, David asks, what are the 3 funerals again? The Waynes, the Clarks. Well, I was talking about the Wayne funeral at the beginning, Clark's funeral, and then Superman's funeral. So Clark and Superman have 2 different funerals. So that's I think those are all the funerals. Other than like everyone dying in the Capitol. But I mean, there are other people who died. But I think in terms of official funerals, I think those are the only ones there. But somebody fact check me if I've forgotten. Venkata says, I like Terrio's approach to making BVS a revenge tragedy. All great trilogies had a middle movie being The Darkest Before the Dawn, The Two Towers, Empire Strikes Back, etc. Yeah, I mean, you have to look at it like that. I mean, I think it was mostly meant to be part of that 5-film arc that he was progressing towards. But yeah, I never had a problem with the second film in Superman dies. I never had an issue with that. I think it makes storytelling sense that why would the Justice League start? This is their interpretation of how the Justice League gets formed. There's a need for the Justice League. Superman's dead. They need to find alternatives. So I love that. I love that it's a sort of a Darkest Before the Dawn type thing. That's why I would have loved to see more of the nightmare sequence unfold in that part of the story. It's because you know that the good stuff would be coming at the end. So I would have been really, really into that. Empire Strikes Back, also a film that's not like super hilarious and funny. Like there's a lot of serious stuff in there. Star Wars is so funny about Star Wars because people love the original trilogy, myself included. I love it. I even love the Ewoks, and I don't want to hear it. The Ewoks are great. I think mostly girls and ladies love Ewoks. I don't think the guys love Ewoks as much, but ladies love a teddy bear, so that's probably part of it. Anyway, that's a whole side tangent. But the original trilogy, great. What happened with the Disney sequels, though, I think, this is my interpretation, is that Disney was trying to replicate the MCU and the humor component in the MCU. So there were a lot of jokey bits in those Disney sequels. Last Jedi, yeah, there were some jokey bits with Luke Skywalker being ridiculous. So they tried to play up the humor in those movies, and it was not like the original trilogy. It just did not have. These were movies about wars in the stars. They were not supposed to be hilarious, funny. And so though I think that's why those movies ultimately didn't work, other than the fact that they were just literally remaking the original trilogy, but that's a whole other conversation. And it's funny because I remember seeing somebody, there was a fan who took, I think, was it just The Force Awakens? I can't remember, but there was somebody who took all the jokes out of the movie and just like played it straight through. And the funny part about doing that is it felt like a Star Wars movie. When you took all those jokey bits out, it was like, that's what the original trilogy felt like. So there's something to be said about it, staying true to the tone in the story that you're trying to tell. So I think it's just weird that everybody in these Rotten Tomatoes top critics reviews, they want everything to be a certain way according to either their standards or the MCU standards or whatever, but they're not looking at the perspective and the story that's being presented to them. Let's see. Yeah, and Ben Conda says the nightmare would have been the jail trilogy's Darkest Before the Dawn. Oh, for sure. I would have eaten that crap up. I love Nightmare Batman so much. He is my favorite Batman. So I would have been like 3 movies with Nightmare Batman, please. We'll take it. And David says The Empire Strikes Back was divided by critics too. How's history treating that? What's the historical context now? The Empire Strikes Back is considered the best Star Wars film ever made. So funny. Yeah, I love history. Don't you? I love history. Okay. Oh, and David brings up E.T. Don't get me started. I have a childhood trauma of E.T. Very, very scared of E.T. It's another example of a great film that I don't like very well. I like it. It's okay, but E.T. is I was scared of him as a child, and it's always kind of followed me into adulthood. But E.T. is a great film. That's one of those films where I'm like, E.T. still kind of scares me a little bit. I would not be cool if he was real and walked into this room right now. I would really freak out, and I'd probably throw my water bottle at him. But that's a great film. It's a great film. Let's see. Also, I love that there's Ewok in the Ewok discussion in the chat. The Ewoks have sharp teeth, overall savage face, and they eat raw meat. Think about it. They did defeat that Imperial army on where are they? Andor? Am I miss Indoor? I was like Andor. That's a different thing. Indoor. Yes. They took the Imperial army and the stormtroopers down. So Ewoks are pretty savage, yeah. Let's see. Trying to see what other things are going on in here. Yeah, so I'm glad other people like Ewoks. That makes me feel better. I think Ewoks, I think they get a bad rap. Dennis also says Ewoks are secretly the manliest thing in the trilogy. Y'all are my people. We're sharing some Ewok love. I love it. Maybe I should talk more about Star Wars after my BVS project is over. Maybe we'll have a Star. I'm not a Star Wars expert, but it would be fun to maybe talk about those films, the original trilogy, and why they've stood the test of time. I'm sure nobody has made videos about that on the internet. Okay, let's get back into the review and wrap this puppy up because I think we've got 2 or 3 more paragraphs. So let's get through this. All right. Todd says, quote, stylistically, it's clear that Snyder felt the weight of responsibility entailed in setting the visual and tonal template for Warner's DC universe to come. Okay, we'll talk about that when we get there. With all the ominous foreboding and hues much darker than the director worked with on Man of Steel, one senses him and cinematographer Larry Fong in their 4th collaboration, although Fong did not shoot Man of Steel, figuratively looking over their shoulders in the direction of hovering executive producer Nolan. Okay, we'll come back to that. Nolan to make sure it's all black and bleak enough. This applies as well to Patrick Tatopoulos' enveloping. I don't think that's spelled correctly. Envelopingly. Is that a word? Google Docs is telling me it should be enveloping. But here in the review, it's envelopingly gloomy production design, as well as the score by Nolan regular Hans Zimmer and the latter's collaborator here, Junkie Casey. We'll get to that, who have come up with a number of very effective musical passages that seriously enhance the mood of impending doom. The look of the Batsuit keeps evolving, and Michael Wilkinson's costumes impressively meet a wide variety of requirements. I don't know why Todd seems to think that there needs to be a visual and tonal template set for DC. What? Why is that? Every film and every filmmaker should have their own style. I don't know why he thinks that needs to be the case. I think Zack Snyder would disagree immensely about that. He also says that Christopher Nolan, maybe this is just him being like hyperbole, like speaking in hyperbole, but he says hovering executive producer. I'm pretty sure that Christopher Nolan, from what I understand about how this film was made, is that Christopher Nolan wasn't hovering over Zack Snyder. He was hovering over the WB executives trying to protect Zack Snyder. So I think that's an incorrect assumption there. He wasn't hovering over Zack Snyder to make sure that things were black and bleak enough. He was actually protecting Zack Snyder to be able to make the film that he wanted. And it's interesting to me that a film critic like Todd here seems surprised that the visuals for Man of Steel and BVS would be different. The stories are different. There's a different cinematographer. There's a different tone. Of course, they're going to be different. He also criticizes BVS for being, quote, black, unquote, and bleak, unquote, which is actually not a negative. He makes it seem like it's a negative, but I don't think it is. The film's story is about the death of Superman and metaphorically the death of God and hope. And I don't know about anybody else, but I think that kind of story should be black and bleak. That's fitting. I think that's correct. That's a correct design choice, a correct production and post-production choice. He also says that there's a gloomy production design. Todd gives no example of this, so I guess I'll be scratching my head over this one until the end of time because he doesn't give an answer, so I don't know what the gloomy production design that he's talking about. He also references Junkie KC, which is not correct. It is actually Junkie XL, which I can only guess is maybe a typo since the X on the keyboard is near the letter C and the letter L is next to the letter K, so maybe he just typed it incorrectly and didn't catch the typo. So I guess we have 2 options here. Either Todd is completely ignorant and didn't do his research to know that it was Junkie XL instead of Junkie KC, or he's a bad typist and doesn't check his work. Neither option, though, is great. So, so no matter which option we go with, it's not a good look. Although I will say in this section, it's nice that there's a compliment here for Michael Wilkinson's fantastic costume design. Because Michael Wilkinson really is one of the unsung heroes of BVS in particular. Because wow, he really outdid himself with the costume design and the wardrobe in BVS. All right, let's Let's wrap this up, and then I'll hop in the chat after we've read through this because I don't want to go too long. Todd continues, quote, based on these proceedings, it's hard to say what ought to happen between Batman and Superman in the future, even indeed if they actually should share the screen again. Obviously, if they fight, it would always have to be a draw. So for the most part, they should collaborate. If Warner's does end up making more standalone Batman and Superman films, the most enjoyable solution would probably be to have the superheroes drop in for surprise visits to the other's world from time to time just to help out, unquote. Wow. We're not getting Todd's thoughts on Batman v Superman. We are getting his fan fiction. This is him talking about what he would want to do, what he thinks should happen. Todd is really just giving them all the pointers. He's like, Zack Snyder, this is what you had to do. Warner Brothers, Todd is giving you free ideas, so you should just do it. What? This is not a film review. It's part like news. It's like a news article about the business, and it's also Todd's fan fiction. This is not a film. This is maybe one of the worst. I hate to say it. I don't want to like negatively critique somebody, but in terms of a film review, this is one of the worst ones in the top critics that I have read through here. This is not a film review. This is not a criticism of art. This is fan fiction and business talk. This is not a review. Even though the boring title of it says it's a film review, it's not. It's not. This is not a film review. It has nothing to do with the merit of BVS as a film. It barely talks about BVS as a film and the storytelling in it. It's talking about what story that Todd wants to see in the future. This is what this section is. I don't like this at all. I'm trying to be very analytically and civil. I'm trying to get out of control. I'll bring it. I'm gonna try to keep it in check. All that to say is, Todd, I think this is maybe a veering off of film criticism's the lane of film criticism. I think this is venturing off into another lane that is not film criticism. I guess that is the fairest way to put it. Okay, and so here is how Todd ends this review. He writes, quote, as other DC characters are rotated into the Warner Brothers big screen world, it's to be hoped that they are introduced and then integrated into the flow of events more gracefully than is Wonder Woman, played by Gal Gadot here. It's as if the filmmakers have simply thrown up their hands at the challenge. After having been briefly glimpsed earlier, she's tossed into the epic final battle between the two heroes and a raging giant that burns as hot as the sun, only to quickly assume battle posture with her sword and shield. Good luck with that, unquote. And that's the end of the review, which to me seems like a strange way to end this article. I'm not even going to call it a review at this point. It's his thoughts mixed in with facts and figures and fan fiction, so I'm not going to really call it a review. But this is a strange way to go out on the Wonder Woman criticism here. This is how I read it. I don't know if this is the way Todd meant it, so I can't validate this reading and interpretation of this part of the article here. But this is how I read it. Is that Todd seems to be criticizing Wonder Woman's ability to fight against Doomsday with her sword and shield. It reads to me as if he thinks that it's ludicrous for her to do that. And for me, I have to ask the question, why? Why does he think it's ludicrous that Wonder Woman fights with a sword and shield? She's the daughter of Zeus and has superpowers. Yeah, she can fight Doomsday. And she uses a sword and a shield in the comics. Why wouldn't she use a sword and a shield? Why not? That's what the Amazons used. Of course she can fight a raging giant that burns as hot as the sun. What is the point that Todd is making here? If anybody has any thoughts, please let me know. I would love a more generous read on this end. I feel like maybe I'm not connecting to what Todd is saying here. Am I reading it correctly? I'm not sure. But I think the ending of this is very strange. And I'm not sure what to make of it. So that is Todd's review from the Hollywood, or again, I don't really want to call it a review. He says it's a review. I think it's an article. I don't. I think it's a news article mixed in with a little opinion. I don't know that I would call it a review, but I guess potato, potato. Okay, well, let me hop back in the chat and just see what other folks are talking about. Let's see. There's a lot more ET conversation that I'm comfortable with, but David is correct. ETs are in the Star Wars galaxy. They show up in the Senate too. It is a good Easter egg, but uh not my favorite thing. Ooh, I'm gonna have dreams of ET haunting me tonight. That's gonna be real fun. Let's see. All right. Venkata says Nolan went from a producer on Man of Steel to an executive producer on BBS. I wish he remained a producer and had more say. Yeah, me too. I think Christopher Nolan is a director who understands the value of the artistic vision of the creator, the filmmaker, because he is one himself. And I think I've never met Christopher Nolan, but I can only assume from one creator to another. I mean, I don't make films like Interstellar or Inception or Dunkirk or something, but I'm a video creator, and I value the ability to do what I want and put out what I would like to see out into the world, and the ability to do it the way I want to do it. So I can imagine somebody like a Christopher Nolan who makes these huge films that have this huge scope and are so artistic in the way that they're put out there. I can imagine that he would really value the creative vision of a filmmaker, because he wants it for himself, and so he fights for others to have that. And I think he actually, I can be fact checked, but from the last I saw about Christopher Nolan, it seemed like he was sort of cutting ways with Warner Brothers. So I don't. It's very telling to me that Warner Brothers is starting to lose a lot of filmmakers, like auteur filmmakers. So that does not speak well to their business strategy. If we're going to talk about their business side of things, about the filmmaking business, as a creative person, that to me says a lot. So I do think having Christopher Nolan fighting some of those battles for Zack Snyder, I think really helped. And I'm really grateful for him, because I think BBS was kind of the last time we got to really see that. Like, see Zack Snyder make the film exactly the way he wanted to make it, except for when they made him take out 30 minutes of it in the theatrical cut. Dennis says, I wish Christopher Nolan would do a movie with Zack Snyder, I think is what this means. Two POVs. Nolan directs one and Snyder another. Ooh, that would be really cool to have them like in the same universe, kind of in like the same franchise, but having them take different parts of it. Yeah, that would be cool. I'd be into seeing that actually. That'd be cool because they could be their own separate films, but it would be different takes on the same thing. That would be really pretty cool. Mask of Shy is in the chat. Hey, Mask of Shy, thanks for joining me. Thanks for being here. Let's see. Mask of Shy also says, I can't think on a solution for what was presented, so I'll just make up my own story to criticize yours. Yes, that's exactly what they're doing. It's very easy to criticize someone else's work. It's much harder to make your own thing. I always think about how, when I see people destroy something, I think about how easy it is to destroy. Destruction is easy. You just tear it down. You just get angry and you tear it down. But it's much harder to create something. It's much harder to think of an idea and implement it and make it beautiful. So I always admire creators, people who build things, because that's much more difficult. It's much more of a risk. You're putting yourself out there to try to make your dream happen, and you might fail. You might try it and it's a disaster, but at least you're trying it. So it takes much more guts. It takes much more risk. It takes much more belief in yourself to actually create something. It's very easy to destroy something. I had to catch myself in this live stream to try to prevent myself from getting really snarky and mean about it, because that's very easy to give into. It's very easy to fall into that habit of just, I'm going to tear this to bits, because it's easy to do that. It's too easy. I'd rather try to take the hard road and try to see if I can be civil about it and try to make a case for why I disagree. And so even in criticism, it's much easier to tear someone else down. So yeah, I think criticizing someone else's work is very easy to do, but to actually make something yourself, that's much harder. That's much harder. Let's see. David says, "Sword and Shield. I hope he loved Wonder Woman 1984 so much he chokes on it." Yeah, she didn't. She didn't use much of that in 1984. I did like the use of the lasso in 1984, uh, but I think some of the problem with that film is that Wonder Woman, in my opinion, and you can see my review of Wonder Woman 1984 on the DCTV podcast YouTube channel. We reviewed it for my the podcast that I do with my friend Morgan. Our podcast, Supergirl Radio, you can see the review there. We actually dressed up in 1980s fashion, so you want to see that, it's a lot of fun, or at least I think it's fun. But yeah, so there, I think the difference there for me in that film is that Wonder Woman was not a real active participant in some of that. She kind of relied on the hope speech there at the end, so it was not a real active thing. So didn't see a ton of fighting from Wonder Woman there. Let's see. Yes, David confirmed something that I was because I'm kind of behind on my Christopher Nolan stuff because I'm very excited about Oppenheimer. I think that'll be really. I kind of. I think the trailer came out when I was on a ship in the middle of the ocean over Christmas, so, so I'm kind of behind my Christopher Nolan news. But David says Oppenheimer will be a Universal production release. Yeah, so I don't know if I'm a young filmmaker and I'm looking at Warner Brothers. I'd rather go anywhere else because they have not had a good track record. They are driving all of their auteur filmmakers away. And Venkata confirms it. Nolan's upcoming movie Oppenheimer is produced by Universal and not WB. Dennis says has a good Teddy Roosevelt quote. It's not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena. Love that. I love that. That's good. And I think that's a good way to maybe end this live stream. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts. I really appreciate you chiming in about film history and fact checking me on things that I couldn't remember right off the top of my head. So I always value and appreciate everybody who shows up to the live stream to read along in the reviews with me and just talk about film criticism. These things are really helping me personally to figure out how I'm going to review things from now on. I'm trying to adapt some of the things that we talk about here. And I say we, me plus the live chat. That's a we. But I'm trying to adapt some of these things to correct some of the bad ways that I've been reviewing some things. But I hope that maybe these live streams are beneficial to everyone in the chat as well, because I've gotten a lot out of them. Thanks mostly to people who come in here and discuss it with me. So thank you all for showing up. Well, that's going to do it for this week's live stream. If you missed this live, I hope you'll consider sharing your thoughts in the comment section below. If you ever have any questions about when I'm going to be live, just check this YouTube channel. I try to make it a weekly thing, but sometimes things come up in life and I have to schedule for the next week. So if you ever have any questions, I'll be scheduling these streams in advance. So just check when I put them up there and hit I think you can hit notify me and YouTube will notify you when I go live. So yeah, just check. I'll be scheduling them. So just pay attention to that if you want to join me for another live stream where we talk about this. And as always, I sort of end these reviews saying, hey, if you have a BVS review that you think is really great, or maybe a Zack Snyder's review, Zack Snyder's Justice League review that you think was really great, or a Man of Steel review that you think did a really good job in terms of film criticism or art criticism, send me a link. I would love to be able to share them with the class and look over what they did well. A lot of the time in these live streams, we're talking about what was maybe not great or not a good practice, or something about these reviews or these critics that didn't do a good job. But maybe we can look at things that are done well. Maybe things that are the opposite, that are actually done well. So if you have any, please comment below and let me know some things that you've looked at that you thought did a really good job that maybe we can learn from. So that option is available to you as well. Well, as always, I'm going to let voiceover Rebecca take us out. So thank you for joining this edition of Reading Reviews with Rebecca. If you would like to see more of these live streams, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/duckmilkprod. If you'd like to keep in touch with me personally, you can follow me on Instagram at the Derby Kid and on Vero at Derby Kid. You can hear my thoughts on the CW Supergirl TV series and all things Kara Zor-El over at Supergirl Radio by visiting supergirlradio.com, subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts, or subscribing to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/DCTV Podcasts. Also, please check out the Justice League Universe podcast for in-depth analysis on the DCEU films, including Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And before I go, I hope that this live stream video series will inspire you to think more critically and thoughtfully about film and storytelling. I'd like to leave you with this quote from C.S. Lewis's book titled An Experiment in Criticism. The truth is not that we need the critics in order to enjoy the authors, but that we need the authors to enjoy the critics. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life.